What's up, people? So now we are at Rob Zombie's 6th film. So after The Lords of Salem, he started to work on his next project. So by 2016, 31 was born. But was it really that well received? Oh, I'm sorry, you're still here. That was rhetorical. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to my Rob Zombie film series review. Thank you so much, guys, for clicking this. I really do appreciate that. So 31 tells the story of a group of friends who are kidnapped by a group of cannibalistic sadists who forces them to play a deadly game of torture, murder, and survival. So with Rob Zombie's newest film just around the corner, which is The Monsters, I thought I'd take this opportunity to finish this off. So after this one, I only have 2 left, including his Monsters. I only have 2 left of his films to do, then we'll be done. Of course, followed by a ranking, so that will come too. And if you hadn't checked them out yet, my reviews for his previous films are down in the description below, so check those out when you can. Let's do this. So Rob Zombie has always been one of those frustrating filmmakers. He didn't really have that good of a start, especially with me with House of a Thousand Corpses. But then Devil's Rejects comes out. I thought it was pretty decent. And then his Halloween movies. Speaking of, the only one that kind of comes close to being kind of epic and a little bit perfect, not perfect, but close, is Halloween 2. Now I know I'm on an island with that, but I actually didn't mind what he brought to Halloween 2. That comes close to me saying that that was one of his finest ones. That's one of those that came close to being just on up there. But he'll come out with something that seems cool, that seems really good, and then I'll watch it and I'll say, the rest of his movies is more of an acquired taste. To me, anyway. It's subjective. I know there's a lot of people out there that might like his brand of style, but to me, he's probably more 60-40. Not terrible, but just, again, acquired taste. So after The Lords of Salem, I almost just about gave up. So whenever 31 came out, okay, yeah, figured I'd give it a go. But was that the one that cut the tie? Let's find out and start off with the positives for 31. I actually did like the story. Now I know The Lords of Salem and 31 is completely different. I've never really been that keen with the way Lords of Salem was handled. I know that dealt with witches, and in a way, yes, it did have its moments. But for 31, I actually did like the story about these kids being kidnapped and forced into this game. It was kind of like a Saw meets Hostel situation. If you put the Saw films and Hostel, put them together, that's kind of what this reminded me of, because they basically kidnap these kids and they put them in this warehouse weird place that kind of resembles like what Jigsaw would put a victim in to play one of his games, and what one of the victims in Hostel would be put in. So, in a way, it was like Saw meets Hostel. I liked that vibe I got from this movie. It's just more my level. Now, believe me, I do have some grievances. And believe me, we will get into those later. Make no mistake, this is far from perfect. Oh, let me tell you, this is far from perfect. It's far from being up the totem pole, that's for dang sure. And I may sound a little hypocritical here, and I don't mean to, especially when I get to the negatives, and especially later on in this review, and I don't really mean to sound that way, but I don't know how else to put it. But compared to The Lords of Salem, I actually did enjoy this story a little better than just witches just going around playing that record and not having a single death scene, which this kind of amps that up a lot as well, which we'll also get into. But this movie does kind of amp it up just a hair story-wise. Mostly because of the slasher factor that's in this. I've always been a sucker for slasher films ever since I was 11 years old. And you know the story, I don't need to repeat it, especially with Scream. But I've always been a sucker for the slasher elements to horror films. And that's what this movie brings. It definitely has a slasher vibe to it. It definitely has a slasher element that I really, deeply to my core, appreciate. Which is one of the reasons why I can tolerate 31 a little bit better than The Lords of Salem. 31 definitely had plenty of it. It was very heavy, in fact. The kills was off the chart. There's plenty of carnage, especially the chainsaw massacre scene. Dang, I actually had a Texas Chainsaw Massacre flashback there for a second. But there's this whole chainsaw massacre type scene to where these two psychos, these two guys that's dressed up as clowns, they just go to town on everybody. Of course, they do a flip around with the surviving kids, you know, just killing them off, and you get one that has his head chainsawed off, which was pretty cool, and one where he falls on a chainsaw, which reminded me of that scene in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning with that biker. So I thought that was pretty cool, and yeah, plenty of gore, plenty of carnage in that scene alone. And there was one guy that took an axe to the gut. That was pretty riveting. In short, the gore factor was definitely high on this. It's definitely high. It was definitely satisfying. You got this character named Doomhead, played by Richard Brake. This guy puts the C in crazy. The first shot you see of the movie is him talking to the camera, and you find out he's talking to somebody he's about to kill. He's very intelligent, but at the same time, very wacko. I mean, this guy's psyche is definitely not one to be trifled with. This is the first movie I actually noticed Richard Brake in. And ever since this movie, he's kind of been on my radar, and I've seen him in other stuff before this, and it baffles me sometimes on how I missed this actor at first. But ever since this movie, this pretty much put him on my radar, and I try to look out for him. He's actually been in other stuff that I've seen recently, other than the Rob Zombie, the Rob Zombie films, because he's been in plenty of those. But this actor definitely caught my attention, especially with 31. He plays one of the villains that the sadists / cannibalists call on. It's kind of like a cleanup guy. If somebody gets out of line or if they survive, he's the guy to call. And I'm telling you right now, this guy, he was pretty creepy. He doesn't show up much, only in the first act and the last act. I wish he was in it more, but he doesn't really show up that much, but damn, this dude really had an impact. He was just so freaking sinister. There's nothing this guy wouldn't do. He's one of those memorable villains, is all I got to say.
They call me Doomhead. Now, I don't call myself Doomhead, mind you, but they do.
He wears this makeup, kind of make himself look like a clown. He knows a lot of stuff about a lot of things. I mean, you can tell by the dialect that Rob Zombie gave him. He's just one of those really smart guys, but at the same time, you do not want to mess with. It even shows a scene where he punches himself. That's how nuts this guy is. Right before he goes on a job, he puts on his makeup, and then he just starts punching himself, making himself bleed and all that. There's just nothing normal about this guy. He's like the top of the villains of this movie. He just shows that level of not giving a shit at all. He's like a much more strung out, serious version of the Joker. I'll just put it to you that way. He's the one villain I actually like, to be honest, compared to the others. Ah! And you got great music. This is the one movie that I figured out that Rob Zombie, he's a fan of the 70s music. Now, me, myself, I'm an 80s child. I was born in the late 80s, but I grew up listening mostly to the 80s. But there's a lot of music in this that I actually recognized. One being the beginning credit scene, Walk Away by James Gang. I actually have that on CD, and I jam out to it, and it's actually pretty good. It's something I jam out to frequently. And you got at the end of the film where they play Dream On by Aerosmith, which is not as good as the other song I just mentioned, but it's still pretty decent. And believe me, I do know of Aerosmith. He put out some good songs too. Steven Tyler. Now that I said my piece, the things that I liked about the film, let's get into the things that frustrated me. And I'll go easy by slipping into the mixed. Sheri Moon's character. And I want to go in order on how she was presented throughout the movie from the beginning to the end. So I hope you understand. When she first shows up, you see her as this sort of, sex-crazed, pervy type person that whenever I first saw her, the House of a Thousand Corpses flashback came to me. And I was thinking to myself, oh God, please don't let that be another character like she was in that movie. Please, please. But what really surprised me is that they did a full 180 flip on me. So whenever that character first shows up, she was annoying. I couldn't stand her. I was this close to actually turning it off a couple of times because I was thinking to myself, damn, why are y'all doing a retread of this character? Why are y'all crapping on her so much? Me personally, Sheri Moon Zombie has the potential to be a great actress. But they keep on putting her in these roles. But what really surprised me is as this film goes on, that little 180 flip they do, as soon as they get into the second act, after the kids gets captured, along with her of course, she turns it around. She definitely turns it around in a big way. And she shows a much more badass, kick-ass side to her. And I gotta say, I was pretty impressed. You know, at first, she was annoying. And I did not want another retread of what she was in House, because that's kind of what she was vibing out to me. But then whenever they do that 180 flip, she shows total badass. She shows just a side to her that I was kind of hoping for, and that it delivered. That's why this is in the mix. So I'm so thankful that Rob Zombie kind of did that. It's like one of those surprising twists, those nice surprises that whenever they do to a character, I like it when they do that. Whenever they introduce a character, she seems so annoying at first, and then as the movie goes on, she turns, like, her whole persona just turns. And that's exactly what happened to Sheri Moon's character in this. And I really didn't like that. I really appreciated that. I did not want to go through another character trait that she did in A House of 1,000 Corpses. I would have killed myself. Like, at first I was like, oh God, really? But then they did what they did, and I was like, oh, cool. I'm game now. Like I said, she was totally badass, especially by the third act, when she was fighting against the villains and just doing everything she had to survive and protect her friends. Total definition of a badass. And I gotta talk about Malcolm McDowell, which it was nice seeing him in another Rob Zombie movie after seeing him as Dr. Loomis in the Halloween movies, which I wasn't that impressed with his portrayal in that, but he had his moments. But Malcolm McDowell, he basically plays the head honcho of the cannibalistic tribe that captures these kids. His name is Father Murder, obviously. I think he was okay, but the only thing I didn't really take kindly to was this whole 17th century look that he donned. Like with the wig and everything, it looked like he just came straight from George Washington's era. That didn't really connect with me as much as I think Rob Zombie would hoped for. And to me, it just seems silly. But as the movie goes on, like with Sheri Moon's character, I kind of warmed up to him. I started seeing how psychotic he was. Like with the whole dinner scene. Like after their one friend was killed off, you could hear the intercom in the back, which is Malcolm McDowell's voice, saying, enjoy your grub. This may be the last meal you ever have. And there's like food on the table. And they start arguing. It's like, I can't do this without an empty stomach and this and that. And then as the scene progresses, Sheri Moon, and this is another trait that kind of adds on to why I started liking her by this point, because by this point it was the second act. She starts noticing something very peculiar. And after they were eating all this food, they start noticing that in the table, somehow they got their dead friends, they see their dead friend's corpse in the table. And they realize that they were eating their friend. They were committing cannibalism. And the way Malcolm McDowell played that part off, he started laughing and being all sinister-like. I actually did appreciate that. So, yeah, again, just like with Sheri Moon's character, didn't like Malcolm McDowell at first, but then I started warming up to him, and he started becoming a pretty cool villain. Not as good as Richard Brake's character, but close enough. To me, it was kind of a memorable moment. I don't know, not to most folks, because this movie is kind of on a low bar, which I understand why, but to me, that particular scene did grab me. And now let's get on to the nitty gritty as we dive into the negatives. Oh boy. Out of all of Rob Zombie's movies I came across so far, this one was by far the worst in the writing department. You know, I've said before that he piles on a little bit too thick on the dialogue, but this movie right here, compared to his others, those were cakewalks compared to this one. He lets it all out. There's not a single line that he didn't cross with the dialogue in this. There's this whole build-up scene with the kids where they were talking about just random shit that probably nobody that in their right mind that rented this movie or bought it or whatever, or just seen it on YouTube, even cared about. And it was just mostly just stupid stuff. And stuff that I can't even repeat. And then there's this nightmare scene, which was completely useless, about the two clowns that was actually killed. They were the ones that had wielded the chainsaw. And it was just this whole nightmare sequence for one of the characters where they were talking to them about how, you know, they were telling jokes about pregnant women and having sex with them. And I can't go into detail because it gets graphic. And it's just, I felt like the dialogue in this, I just felt like taking a shower, which I probably will after this review. It's just totally unnecessary. And like I said, compared to the others that I bitched about with the dialogue and like The Devil's Rejects and Halloween and all them, those are a cakewalk compared to this one. He just laid it on like thicker than thick in this movie. And it just, why? Just, why? Plus, you have a lot of scenes to where, especially by the end of the second act, there's a bunch of attack scenes to where they choose the most shakiest camera angles ever. And almost to the point where you couldn't understand what was going on at all. And on top of that, there was a bunch of darkened scenes where you couldn't even see because it was so dark. You had to change the contrast to your TV up like 10 notches and the brightness of your TV. That's how bad this was. That cinematography in this, oh man, it was horrible. Not to mention there was this one scene where it was just so flashy. It was an attack scene where this girl was attacking one of the main characters, and the way that scene looks, I'll describe it to you this way. If you look at it long enough, you will develop epilepsy. I mean, just picture your screen just flashing a bright white constantly while things are going on. I swear, almost to the point where I had to turn my head. I had to turn my head literally. That was one experience compared to, like, especially on top of the dialogue and all that, that was not enjoyable at all. I swear, if I'd have looked at the TV any longer, I would have developed some sort of blindness or epilepsy or whatever the hell else. That was not enjoyable at all, and that's something that I definitely hope I will never experience ever again in any movie in the foreseeable future. It was just rough to get through. I'll end it that way. It was rough. Very rough. And going back to the dark scenes, it was so dark that all you had was sound. And that's basically all they gave you. Just picture this. I'm gonna kick your ass. That's all you see. That's how dark it was. It's just very furiously frustrating. I'm halfway through this series. I thought I seen it all. Damn, I was wrong. To conclude this review, guys, this really wasn't one of Rob Zombie's best. Though it still doesn't compare to House of a Thousand Corpses. If I was to compare to that film and 31 would probably be a hair up. Yeah. Though I still enjoyed the film for its slasher elements, gore, and story, this was a little bit of a letdown because I was caught off guard. So 31, what was your thoughts? Were you a fan? Was this your favorite Rob Zombie film? Did you find any enjoyment out of this whatsoever? Or are you somebody that just felt like this was just too much and it just was not in your line of fire, just was not your cup of tea? Leave me a comment down below and give me your thoughts. Thank you so much, guys, once again for hearing me ramble. I really do appreciate it. Like, subscribe, comment, and share as always, the big four. And make sure to click that bell icon so you don't miss a thing. And I will see you on the next one. Peace.